Welcome to the Breakaway podcast. Thanks for joining us as we study the book of Philippians. For more information on Breakaway, visit breakawayministries.org. We hope you enjoy the talk and stick around for more at the end.
Tonight's scripture is Philippians 2:14 through 30. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent children of God, without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. Even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering among the sacrificial offering of your faith, I'm glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me.
I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, so that I too may be cheered by news of you. For I have no one like him who will be genuinely concerned for your welfare. For they all seek their own interests, not those of Christ Jesus. But you know Timothy's proven worth, how as a son with a father he has served with me in the gospel. I hope, therefore, to send him just as soon as I see how it will go with me. And I trust in the Lord that shortly I myself will come also. I've thought it necessary to send you, like Epaphroditus, my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier, and your messenger and minister to my need. For he has been longing for you all, and has been distressed because you heard that he was ill. Indeed, he was ill, near to death, but God had mercy on him, not only on him, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. I am the more eager to send him, therefore, that you may rejoice at seeing him again, and that I may be less anxious. So receive him in the Lord with all joy, and honor such men, for he nearly died for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was lacking in your service to me.
Well, a few years ago, I took the Breakaway staff to the Guadalupe Mountains out in West Texas. And we went out there just to kind of get in the wild for a few days. And so we drove out there, and once we got out there, we realized there's not many campsites at the national park, and so they were all full. So we were wondering, okay, so what do we do? And the park ranger at the Guadalupe Mountains said, well, you can just drive over the border, New Mexico, and stay on BLM land. And we were like, excuse me, what? What are you saying? What is that word? And he said, BLM, Bureau of Land Management. He said in New Mexico, they have hundreds of acres of land that just anyone can camp on anywhere. So just drive into New Mexico, whenever you feel good about it, stop and stay there. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, we're just going to pause on some property in New Mexico and set up camp and stay there. He's like, yeah. And I'm like, and no one's going to arrest us or shoot us or anything. No. Okay, so we went out there and literally just drove on what could barely be called a road, just out in New Mexico, bumping along in the desert until we thought, I guess we'll stop. And we got out there, and there's a whole lot of nothing. I mean, it was a desert. There's no trees. I mean, it's just kind of dust and sky, a lot of sky, right? And so we were out there, and as we began to set up camp, we didn't even notice what was happening around us. We were busy putting tents up and cooking food and et cetera, until finally one of us called out that as the sun began to go down, the stars came out. And in that place where there's no artificial light anywhere because you're miles from civilization, I remember one person looked up and went, look at the stars, right? And we looked up, and it was shocking how bright they were. It was a dark sky filled with headlights beaming down on us. It was unbelievable, and we just hadn't realized that, man, this whole life of artificial lights, of lampposts and cell phone lights and everything else had kept us from seeing this. But we looked up at the sky, and it was beaming down on us, and we didn't have a quiet moment. We just paused to take in the immensity. We were losing it out loud. We're like, that is incredible, just freaking out, because instantly we felt connected to our ancestors. We're like, this is what they saw every night? This is unbelievable. And suddenly it made sense, because when you're a kid, someone was like, there's the Big Dipper. And you're like, I guess. Like, at that point, though, we were like, no, that's a spoon in space. It's obvious. And that's clearly a guy with a bow and arrow. Like, it was beaming out at us. Oh, my gosh, this is unbelievable. And we realized this is how they did it. This was so critical for our ancestors through most of human history that this kept them safe. that they could see where things were at night. They could walk without bumping into things, that this isn't just beautiful, it's important to give you your bearings. It's how they navigated across deserts and across oceans, because they could look up at fixed points and say, that light is leading me home. It's showing me the way forward. And man, we looked up and thought, wow, the impact, the difference these luminaries in the night sky make for those who have eyes to see them. And I don't know if I can communicate. I mean, I can talk about it and try to get you excited about it, but the truth is, it's hard to even bring across just how significant it was that night. So just, if you can, just imagine a pitch black room. Get your mind around total darkness. We don't have that for safety reasons. But if you're in pitch blackness, I mean, they make horror movies about that. I remember seeing one that it was like, here's the premise. It's really dark, right? And that's pretty terrifying. And so imagine in the midst of the darkness, not just how beautiful or attractive a light becomes, but how important it is, how necessary it is to keep you safe, to give you your bearings, to show you where you are, to give you a sense of direction of that's the way to go, to give you warning of here's things that are coming at you need to avoid and not run into. A light becomes critical to guide people home. And when you got a group of lights, a bunch of lights shining together, filling a night sky, you change a culture, you change a world that way. Now, why am I saying this? Why are we talking about illumination? For this reason, this is what the Christian church is meant to be. Paul's been talking to the Philippians, and he's been telling them God is building a family. God's building a community, that he's coming to disparate people, all different kinds. And you saw it in the book of Philippians. He went to successful businesswomen and burnt out and abused slave girls and blue-collar working guys. And God's just grabbing people and pulling them into his family. And what Paul told us in 2 Corinthians is that the same God who said, let light shine in the darkness and created the sun, lets light shine into our hearts to give us a knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus. That's what it is to become a Christian. God turns the lights on in you. And not just in you, that you can see I'm in need and I'm broken and can't fix me and Jesus is the answer. You see that, but Paul says in Ephesians, not only do you see the light of the beauty of Jesus, he says you become light to the world. And so Jesus said in Matthew 5, you're the light of the world. He says you're a city on a hill. You don't hide that. You don't light a lamp and put it under a bowl. You set that thing up to illuminate the house. And he says a Christian is meant to be a light to the world, to be something different, that in the midst of a dark and twisted generation, we would shine like stars in the world. That's what Paul said, right? And not just so we can be different from everybody else. Yes, we shine apart from the people, but Christians shine for the people. We're not just a light separate from the people. We're a light for the people. That Jesus said that we're a light so that people could see your good works and glorify God in heaven. That the Christian life is supposed to be so radically altered by Jesus that it becomes an illumination for people to see God through you. That's the Christian life. And that's what he's talking about here. He says that there's a way for the Christian community to be a bright, shining light to the world, showing them the way home to God. So I was in a meeting not long ago with guys from literally all over the country, men that had been deeply woven into some addiction and some broken practices that had devastated their life. And they were talking about their past, and one after another talked about the abuse they suffered as children. Horrible stories. And yet they weren't there just wallowing in that pain. They were talking through it to process it because they wanted to move on into freedom. And the person leading the group had been one of them, had been someone who had come from a very difficult past and made some very destructive decisions as a way of trying to cope with the pain in his heart. And he had felt the consequences of that for years. And yet, by the grace of God, he found forgiveness and healing and hope and life, and he was changed. And sitting there watching this guy, you go, you were darkness, and now you are light. and you're a light to these men, leading them home to God. That is amazing, and that's what the Christian church is meant to be. The only question we have left to answer tonight is, how do we do it? If I just say to you, Christian, be a light to the world, showing people the beauty of God, you'd go, okay, how? Well, Paul tells us how, and it's mind-blowing. In verse 14, he says, do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Did you catch that? You catch the key to it? He says, you get to shine like a luminary, like a light in the universe. How, Paul? He puts a that at the beginning of verse 15, so that it's a result. If you do what's in verse 14, the result will be that you shine like a light in the universe, leading your roommates, dorm mates, suite mates, people to know and love Jesus. What's the key, Paul? How do I do it? He says, do all things without grumbling or questioning, disputing. That's the key, which is fascinating to me. He doesn't say, if you want to shine like a star in the universe, give all your money to the poor. Surrender your body to the flames. What does he say? He says, you want to shine like a light in the universe? Don't be a cry-cry. That's what he says. If you do all things without grumbling and questioning, the result is that you'll shine like a star in the universe. How do you shine in the universe? By not being a cry-cry. Not grumbling and complaining. It sounds so anticlimactic until you go live in the real world and realize how hard that really is. Because most of our conversation is grumbling and complaining. You know that, right? Read an article in Huffington Post recently that said 30 to 40% of all your conversations are complaining about something. Did you know that? That's mind-blowing. There was a report in New York Times recently that said 95% of all consumers of products, if they don't like the product, will not tell the company that built it in order to help them improve it, but they will tell 10 to 15 friends. Isn't that unbelievable? 95% of consumers. I hate this thing, but rather than tell the person who can fix it, let me tell all you people who can't, just to make your day a little bit less great. We all do it. We all complain. We all whine. It's the language of our culture. Listen to it tomorrow and see if not 30 to 40% of your conversations are whining. They are. You won't even know what to say. I mean, the way we build relationships, when you sit down in class next to someone, hey man, how's it going? Good. And then someone will go, yeah, I hate this class. And what do you say? Dude, me too. Even if you kind of don't. Like, oh, I'm totally going to fail. You're like, right? Even if you're doing fine. Try it tomorrow. Don't complain. I promise you, you won't know what to say. You'll be like, but my shoes are comfortable? Like, you're not going to know. It's so hardwired in us to whine about things, to just point out negativity without in any way pointing out a positive way to change it. It's interesting, the word grumbling in Greek, give you a little Greek lesson tonight, is the word gongusmon. And it's an onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a word that sounds like the sound it makes, like pow or bam or something like that, right? So gongusmon doesn't have an etymological meaning. It was the word in Greek, gongusmon, is grumbling because it sounds like grumbling. And we just walk around and go, gongusmon, gongusmon. And that's what we do. We whine about stuff, right? I read through the Twitter feeds of celebrities recently and just found complaints about their private jet, the stress of wearing brand new sneakers, Burger King being compared to Hitler. And I thought, forget celebrities, let's just pull up some of your Twitter feeds, right? No, I'm just kidding, I'm not gonna do that. But it scares you, doesn't it? And let me tell you why it's bad. It's an entirely useless activity. It's not going to help anybody. It doesn't solve anything. It doesn't help anyone. And some of you go, well, Ben, I could just feel some of you are defensive. You're like, well, yeah, I complain, Ben. Yes, I've complained. But look, everybody does. And just listen to that. If there's a voice in you rising up that's pushing back against me, that's saying, yeah, I complain, listen to the argumentation of that voice, because it's probably saying, hey, everybody complains. Exactly. That's the point. You don't stand out. You don't shine, because everybody does that. But the Christian is meant to be something different. You're meant to have a totally different way of communicating that is attractive to people. It's attractive to people. West Virginia beat Baylor last weekend. All right. To celebrate, fans began destroying street signs, lighting things on fire, and doing thousands of dollars of damage to their own town. Until police had to fire tear gas to break it up. I don't think anybody read that and went, man, that's neat. That's so great. I want to be a part of that. How do I get there? Our team had a tougher time in Alabama. But I had a friend from Alabama tweet this to the whole world. He's in ministry there. And he tagged me on it, but tweeted it to everybody. And this is what he said. Very impressed with A&M's fan base. Staying until the end and continuing to do their cheers. Very cool. And even though he's an Alabama guy and an Alabama minister, he just had said, hey, I need to let everybody know something going on there is special and it's different. Positivity is attractive. It's attractive, right? And so we're meant to be that way. And here's the thing. It's not just that complaining is a worthless activity. It hurts people. It's not just a net zero when you complain about things. It hurts people. It's a bad thing. While we're on the subject of football, I remember a few years ago, we had one of our volunteers in ministry at Breakaway do what a lot of students do. Went to a football game, was frustrated by the performance of some of the players. I think some receiver wasn't handling his job the way she thought he should, so she did what a lot of people did, just went to her social media deal and just slashed off, he needs to figure this out, whatever, just kind of said something about it. And so my wife pulled her aside and said, hey, I just want to clue you in on something. You've got that big Breakaway logo on everything about you on social media. And so you represent Breakaway. You're a leader at Breakaway. And Breakaway, that's significant, but Breakaway is a voice that's pointing people to Jesus, to the Son of God who loves people. And while we were his enemies, Christ died for us. That's the message you're putting out. And so with that voice, you bashed a student, a fellow student, who attends Breakaway. And so I just need you to hear that you had an opportunity to speak life, and you spoke hurt into his world for no good reason. And when she heard that, she did what any good Christian person would do. She absolutely wept at the thought of hurting somebody like that. She thought she was just doing what everybody else was doing, just slashing off commentary about people. And the truth is, it is what everybody else is doing, but that doesn't make it good. It makes it terrible. And it's not something we do. It's not something we do. And we had a good talk with our leaders about the fact that we love our students and we love our student athletes. And when we speak, we will speak life. We won't speak like this, right? Because it doesn't shine. It's not innocent. That means unmixed. That's what that means. I don't want mixture of the praise of Jesus and cutting remarks to you. That mix doesn't make sense. It's painful. So you want to shine like a star in the universe? You stop complaining. And not just stop complaining, but stop disputing or questioning is what the text says, because grumbling turns into disputing. This is the language from the book of Exodus. And what happens is when you grumble, it dilutes the message. When you dispute, resist authority, push back, it derails the cause. That's what happened in the book of Exodus, that they were meant to walk to the promised land of the people of God. But as soon as everything didn't go their way, they didn't get the water the way they wanted it, the food wasn't quite how they liked it, they began to grumble and complain, and the grumbling got louder, and then they complained against the leadership, they pushed back against Moses, full-on rebellion, complete forfeiture of their purpose in life to shine to the nations the glory of God, because they were cry-cries. And they kept doing it, and it hurt the message, derailed the cause, right? There's a holy site in Jerusalem called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's the traditional site of the crucifixion of Jesus. and a big church has been built there. There are 6 denominations of Christians that all feel a sense of ownership of that building. And so every year there's a holy day they go to honor the crucifixion of Jesus on our behalf. And on several occasions, full-on fights have broken out. And you can watch them on YouTube. Little old men in robes with beards, punching and then just stomping on other little old men in robes with beards. Because I was trying to worship Jesus and you got in my way, and so I'm taking you out, son. Let me ask you something. It gets so bad there that they actually had to take the keys away. The government took the keys to the building away from the Christians and had to give it to 2 Muslim families to coordinate that place because the Christians couldn't get along. How effective do you think their witness to Jesus is in that neighborhood? Will you come and know the grace and love of Jesus Christ, that love that permeates my heart and spreads out to my brothers? What did you do over there? I'll kill you, right? It hurts the message, right? I remember showing up at a church in California once, and I was walking up to the church, and they had greeters from the parking lot to the front door. And all the way from the parking lot walking up, every greeter looked me in the eye, said, "Hey man, glad you're here." And it wasn't like in a fake way, like, glad you're here, and like doing clickers. You know, they were looking at me like, "Hey, I'm so glad you're here, welcome." And I came in and there's people at an info booth like, "Can I help you find something?" "Oh my gosh, where are you guys from?" "Oh, that's so cool." Just super friendly people. And then when I sat down and heard the message and the guy talked about a God who loves me, I thought, if that God exists, then this would be the most normal way to treat people. And all these people, the way they treated me, amplified his message about Jesus. Do you go to a church? Have you been to a church? Are you a part of a church where you stand around and complain and you say, "I wish they would do that different," or "I don't like that worship guy," or "The worship here is just not as authentic as in my back home church," and kind of do that? Do your friends hear you at the workplace, in your office, in your classrooms, in your dorm rooms, complain, and then come to them and say, "But why don't you come worship the Christ who's revolutionizing my life?" It's going to work against the message. You want to shine like a star in the universe. We don't complain. We don't grumble. We come at it a totally different way, that we may be innocent, blameless, children of God without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. The world is a dark and broken place. And when we are positive, we adorn the gospel. We do. I remember when I was in college, I went to lunch with some friends, and we were there, and the waitress was terrible at waiting tables. And as a waiter, I was just like, whoa, it just wasn't going well. And but one of the sweet girls at the table with us, it was a group of Christian people, it was like after church or something, she was like, "You know what? The service has been less than stellar, but you know what? She's going to see us all pray before we eat. And so let's just make sure we're overboard sweet to her." And we all thought, that makes sense. Totally cool. And so she'd come to the table and just mess up everything, and we'd be like, "Thank you, what's your name?" "Oh my gosh, all right, take care," whatever. And so we were just sweet to this waitress. "It's fine, it's okay." And so at the end, when we were getting ready to pay the bill, she walked up to the table and she started to cry and sat down in the booth with us, which is not a normal thing for a waitress to do. I don't know if it's normal for you, it wasn't normal for me. She cries and sits down. And she said, "Can I just let y'all know I've had a very difficult set of circumstances back home that I've been trying to process. And I showed up to work and some people ditched. We were short-staffed, and so they gave me way too many tables. And so I'm running around doing the best I can, and everybody's mad at me." And she says, "This has been the worst day. And I've done terrible service for you guys. And y'all have been so sweet to me. And when I saw you praying, I just thought, I just need to sit down and say something to you." And I was so grateful at that moment. I wasn't a cry about the pancakes being 3 minutes late. Because we got a chance to change the world. Because we used our voice to breathe words of life. That's what he says in the next verse. Holding on to the word of life, we shine like stars in the universe. I'm going to speak life-giving words, not life-taking words. Do you see it? That's how you shine. So you go, "Well, Ben, if I'm not going to complain, what am I going to say? I mean, you just knocked out 30 to 40% of everything I talk about." Let me give you an alternative. And here's the thing, to give you an alternative, well, let me just do it. To give you an alternative, not grumbling and complaining. If I'm not going to do that, what do I give you? Genuine concern for people. A genuine concern for people. Because complaining is an inherently selfish act, right? I just wanted to vent to make me feel better. Okay, that was just about you. That wasn't about, let me use these few sentences I have to speak to you to build you up, right? And so complaining is a selfish thing. Rather than grumbling and complaining, Paul flips it and says, what about genuine concern for people? And he starts showing them a picture of what that might look like. And he starts with himself. In verse 17, he says of himself, even if I'm to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I'm glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you should be glad and rejoice with me. Paul's in prison, but he doesn't have time to complain. Why not? Because he has a genuine concern for God and others. He does. That's what fills Paul's life. And the imagery Paul uses here is that of a priest. That a priest in the Old Testament, when they would come to worship God, they would bring a sacrifice. And Paul says here in this section, as a New Testament minister, I'm not sacrificing bulls and goats. When I come to God, I want to worship God. I want to honor God. And he says, the best thing I can bring God is you. Is you. People that I've invested in, people I've spoken the gospel to, people I've encouraged when they struggle. What I'm going to bring to him is you, the sacrificial offering of your faith, that I want to walk up to God, and when I reach the end of my life, I want to say, here are the people, God, that I encouraged, I blessed, I built up, I loved. Every Christian should have these. People that you could walk forward and say, this is my sacrifice, God. This is my offering. I love you, you love them, so I poured out my life for them. And then Paul looks at himself and says, if I'm to be poured out as a drink offering on the sacrifice of your faith, I rejoice and I'm glad. The drink offering was the last offering of the day. It was the wine you would pour out, the libation at the end, and you would empty the cup and you'd say, it's over, lights out, end of the day. And Paul's using it, he uses it in 2 Timothy as a metaphor for his death. What he's saying is, my whole life is bent towards a genuine concern for you. And he said, so in that sense, if my life is a pouring out my blood and my life to the very end, and all my life was a way of helping you trust God more and enjoy God more, what does he say? I rejoice and I'm glad. The best way to live life is to use my mouth and to use my hands and to use my life to help you trust God more. He says that's the most deeply satisfying way to live. I would be glad, I would rejoice, and you should likewise be glad and rejoice with me. He says you should be just like this. I remember not long after I came to Breakaway as a director, one of our board members, a sweet woman, Kathy Jackson, passed away. And I remember we used to do our board meetings in her house because she was so weak by the end that one of the other board members would literally have to pick her up to move her from a chair to different spots in her house. And I went to her funeral, and I remember being surprised because I only knew her in that state, but seeing at the funeral these pictures of her vibrant and healthy and full of life. And I showed up at Grace Bible Church, and Grace Bible was packed out with people testifying, celebrating the encouragement they had gotten in their life from Kathy Jackson. That from the time they knew her until the moment she was gone, she poured out her life for others. And the room was filled with people testifying, I'm a better person because of her words in my life. I'm a better person because of the way she would call me, because of the notes she wrote, because of the way she would speak for me. For me as a leader, I remember having to have a really hard conversation with a staff member, and I called Kathy and said, will you sit by me? As a leader, I remember Kathy sitting by me as I had to make some tough leadership calls. We should all have that. That at the end of our life, who are the people that will have lost a voice of truth because you're gone? We should have this. That I have a sacrifice and offering to God, and it's them, right? It's my people. How do you get that? Some of you go, okay, Ben, you're telling me not to grumble and complain, but have a genuine concern for people. How do I do that? Well, here's the thing. We could end this talk by giving you a bunch of pointers on how to not grumble and complain, like just try to keep your mouth shut. Think about something else. I don't know that that's real helpful. I could try to give you reasons why complaining's not all that beneficial, like it leads to depression and less work productivity and makes people not want to hang out with you. But at the end of the day, I don't think that's really going to solve it for a lot of us. Because the reality is, Jesus said, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth will speak. And so what you need is not just a change of tactics. When someone hurts your feelings, just say something else. Serenity now. That's not the key. You need a change of heart. And you go, Ben, if you're telling me not to grumble and complain, when I walk into a conversation, not to take the 10 sentences I have and use them to just spew out meaninglessness, but to rather step in and say, how do I speak words that'll build you up and breathe life? Ben, how do I do that? Well, what's interesting is what Paul does to close out is he just points the camera lens at two people. Rather than give them a bunch of advice, he just gives them some models to follow. And he's given them some basic things like, I want to send Timothy to you, but he says way more than that. He says, I thought it necessary to send to you Timothy, but then he just goes off on Timothy for a while. They know Timothy, but he says, I have no one like him who will be genuinely concerned for your welfare. They all seek their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know Timothy's proven worth, how as a son with a father, he served me in the gospel. That was not necessary if all he wanted to communicate was, I'm sending Timothy to you. If I tell you, hey, I'm going to send somebody to deliver a package to you, I don't say, hey, I'm going to send Brent over to call you. Brent, my fellow worker, who I love deeply, who you know has proven worth, that all others don't care about the cause of Jesus, and yet there is Brent. You'd be like, why is he doing this? Because he's trying to show the model. If you go, well, Ben, I don't want to be a complainer. I want to be someone with compassion, genuine concern. How do I do it? He shows you Timothy. And what does he show you? He says, everyone else cares. He says, I have no one like him who will be genuinely concerned for your welfare. They all seek their own interests, not those of Christ. And he does something really interesting. He parallels the sentences. But he doesn't say, I have no one like him who will be genuinely interested in your welfare. For all are selfish, but he cares about you. That's not what he says. He says he's genuinely interested in you because he's interested in Jesus Christ. It's a genuine concern for Christ that will become a genuine concern for people. How do I become someone who complains less and breathes life to people? You fix your eyes on Jesus. That's what happened to Timothy. That as he contemplates the Jesus you saw earlier in this chapter, who abandoned all the benefits of or glories or comforts of godhood to serve us. He that would take away his glory and take on the place of a servant. If I fix my eyes on him, it becomes easier for me to say, I want to be like him when I walk out into the world, right? It's a change of heart. Not many do this because all seek their own interests. What's interesting about that is if you're a Christian, then Jesus Christ has put his very spirit in you. You have affection for Jesus in your heart. I heard a pastor comment on this section this way, and I thought it was so challenging. He says, what made Timothy so different than them? They were seeking their own interests. And then he said this, it is not the deception of false doctrine or the disqualification of gross sin, but it is the distraction of the world that keeps them from making a difference. That when Paul looks around, he says, it's not that these people are suddenly believing lies about Jesus. It's not that they've gotten into some really gross, illegal sin. He said, what's keeping them from really making a difference for Christ? They're just distracted with their own interests. And if you're a Christian, you have a heart for Jesus, but that passion for him may have gone cold, not because you're doing anything particularly evil, but because you're not doing anything particularly beautiful either. And so I want to challenge you, press into Jesus, because to see him is to love him. And when he has your heart's affections, he will get the work of your hands. When you focus in on him, you'll become someone who focuses on others. That's what Epaphroditus did. Paul talks about Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus who they know. Epaphroditus who they sent to Paul. So Paul doesn't need to describe him. They sent him to Paul. And yet Paul says, you know Epaphroditus, I'm sending him back. My brother, fellow worker, fellow soldier, your messenger and minister to my need. And then he just goes on about how amazing this guy is. Why, Paul? He says in verse 29, receive him in the Lord with all joy. Honor such men, for he nearly died for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete your service, what was lacking in your service to me. He says, when Christ has your heart, when Christ's interests are your interests, then he'll have your hands. When he has the affections of your heart, he'll have the work of your hands. And you look at Epaphroditus, he was consumed with Christ, and so the work of Christ became his own, even to the point of death. And that's where we'll be. You fix your eyes on Jesus, the God-man who humbled himself to come to us, love us, forgive us, serve us. And I promise you what will happen is that when you step out to your roommate, your suite mate, your dorm mate, you'll say, I want to be a breath of life to them as well. That's how I want to live my life. Right? And you can make a difference that way. I've told this story here before, I don't remember when, but it bears repeating. I remember once, one of the few opportunities I had to walk around in the concourse at Breakaway, talking with one of our resource team volunteers. I remember visiting with her, and I asked her, how did we get you as a volunteer? Like, how did you arrive? I'm always fascinated by that question. And she said, well, it's wild. I was an atheist and found a lot of joy in stressing out Christians, just harassing them to death. And I'm like, okay, like I'm locked into the story now. And she said, yeah, so most of my high school was just getting Christians mad because they talked about love, but all I had to do was say a few sentences before they would just lose their Jesus and go crazy. And she said, I thought it was fun to sort of poke holes in their testimony that way. And she said, and then I got to college. And I was sitting in a class, and this girl sat next to me. And she was one of those girls that was just a little too nice to be real, kind of like, hey, how are you? And you're like, okay, fake, and she said, but she said it didn't go away. She was really like that. She was really nice. She was genuinely interested in me. She said, and then she invited me to have pancakes at her house because she does a little breakfast with her friends. She said, who does that? And she said, so I went. And I hung out and had pancakes with these people. And she said, they were the nicest, sweetest people. I thought, what an amazing group of people. Are y'all even real? She said, and then she was in class one day on a Tuesday, and the girl came bouncing into class with a Breakaway volunteer shirt on, and she went, oh, you're one of them. But she couldn't make fun of her. She couldn't attack her because she was so nice. And sure enough, she invited her to Breakaway. And she found herself saying yes. And she said, I would go and sit next to her, and the message you were talking about a Jesus Christ who would love even his enemies, made total sense in the light of how I was treated. And she said, and it broke through to me. And then she told me one day, driving back from Breakaway, they were sitting in the car, and she said, okay, what do I got to do to be baptized? And they were like, what? And she said, I'm in. What's the rules? What's the game? I'm in. I got it. And she said, I wanted to know the Jesus who had changed their lives, and I wanted him to change mine. And she said, so now I'm here on the resource team, trying to help people know Jesus, who came to a wretch like me. And I go, that's how it's done, right there. No more grumbling, no more complaining, but a genuine concern for God that becomes a genuine concern for people. When he has the affections of my heart, he gets the work of my hands. And oh, the difference it could make when you and I begin to shine like stars in our dorm rooms, in our sororities, in the core. Oh, what God can do with Christians who speak words of life for his glory, and they're good.
Well, howdy, and welcome to the Breakaway podcast. My name is Elizabeth, and I am sitting here with Ben in Reed Arena after another Tuesday night breakaway. So, yeah, tonight we're in Philippians 2 and cover verses 14 through 30 and really focused in on what it is to be a light and that imagery in Scripture, to be like shining stars. And what Paul tells us in just very clear terms is you don't grumble and you don't dispute and you don't question, which I think is just a super convicting thing if we're honest, to sit there and go, man, like that's practical and that intersects with my daily life. Even just like you said, 30 to 40% of our conversation is complaining. And so I think for me and for everyone I talked to tonight, it was like, yeah, gotta work on that, which is great. It's good to be convicted and to see just what Paul says about that and the result of that. But I feel
Absolutely.
like you got a lot of notes there, Ben. So there's probably a lot more to say about it.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. It is, for me, it's helpful to think in terms of when I step into a conversation, and I literally think about that way, like if I walk up into a circle of people or walk into a moment with you, I'm going to get
a certain number of sentences even, maybe 10 sentences in a conversation or 3 minutes or an hour or whatever. Go, what will the net result of my having spoken be? If I'm consistently a net negative or a zero, like I just kind of complain, then you go, that's not who I want to be in life. I don't want to be that person. And so for me, that's what I'm pushing for is going, I want to be a life-giving person that when you walk away, people go, he wasn't being fake, wasn't like trying to fake like everything is great. Isn't it a sunshiny day? And you're like, he's just not being real. But I want a real, authentic, from the heart love of life and belief that God is sovereign over all of it and it's a gift. And my wife is a gift and my kids are a gift and my friendships are a gift and I love our staff and I love what I get to do for a living. And I want to really feel that and speak from that place, And so that's why I really focused in on the end of just not trying to just tack some fake language onto a heart that's really dissatisfied, but really press your heart into Jesus. And by that, I mean really coming to him honestly. And that's what I do devotionally. I go, Lord, here's my fears, concerns, frustrations, and I don't want to operate out of these. And then as I read the Word of God and listen to the Word of God taught, I want him to change my perspective because that'll change my practice. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But you're right. I got a lot of notes. So let me roll through about 5 things for clarification's sake. Number 1 is by saying not to complain, I don't mean you never say anything negative. What Paul is advocating in this text is there's 2 kind of ways to live life. There's a negative and a positive, a constructive and a destructive way to use your mouth in your life. And in a constructive life, I can call out things that aren't done well, or I can say to somebody, hey, I don't like the way this is happening here, or I think we need to change that. But even when I'm pointing out something, I'm doing it. I think the question you need to ask is my goal redemptive? Mm-hmm. Am I aiming to improve a state of things by saying it that way? There's a way to come into a situation where I just state something negatively, or I can state it positively, Someone could walk up to me. I was thinking about it just the other day. When I speak, sometimes I'll drop real low and people say they have a hard time hearing me. Someone could just walk up to me and say, hey, I hate your voice. Okay. There's nothing I can do with that. Yeah. You see what I mean? You're like, you've helped me 0. This was a net negative conversation. This helped no one. But someone could come up and say, hey, when you drop lower, we have a hard time hearing you. And I know you're saying something that's valuable. Could you speak up? And I go, okay, that helps me.
Yeah.
Point number 2 is the thought about disputing. I had someone come up and say, does that mean you can never disagree with somebody? He said, what if my boss is asking me to do something I think is unethical? I said, no, it's not that. You can certainly say, I don't know if I agree with that idea, or can I not do that? But I told him in that work context, I said, you're wanting to come in and go, I want to be a positive force in this work environment. And I said, so read the book of Daniel, where Daniel could disagree with the king, but say, oh, king, may you live forever. I won't bow before that statue. I respect the man while disagreeing with the activity and refusing to do it, but in a respectful way. Mm-hmm. Or like in Daniel chapter 1, creating another avenue. Hey, I don't want to eat this way because it violates my relationship with God. Can I try it this way? Was that acceptable to you? And you see Daniel pushing forward ideas. What he means by disputing in this passage is he's really talking about in the Christian community, people that enter into the church, in the community of faith, and you're not a force for good. You just complain. You criticize the way the church does this and that, but you're not helpful. You're not greeting people. You're not encouraging people. You're just pushing back against the leadership. And anyone who's been on a sports team knows if you have a player that complains and grumbles and pushes back against the coaches, your team can't win. That destroys unity.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the church. And that's what Paul's pressing forward here. All right, number 3 is a note on healing. Surprised? No, because some of you are thinking, what happened to Epaphroditus? He was sick. All I want to say about this is Paul says, I'm sending Epaphroditus back to you. Part of it, which was so beautiful, he says, because he's been longing for you all, and he was distressed because he heard because you heard that he was ill, which I think is so sweet about Epaphroditus. He's worried about you because you heard he's sick. Like that's how sweet this guy is.
Yeah.
And Paul says, indeed, he was ill. He almost died. They had sent Epaphroditus to minister to Paul. And by minister, he means bring him like food, supplies, probably money while he's in prison. And to do that back then, you didn't catch a plane. The guy walked, maybe rode a donkey, definitely got on a boat, got into a caravan. I mean, this was
That's a big trip.
A trek.
Yeah.
Yes. And he did it for the sake of Paul. And Paul said it almost killed him. And so Paul said, I'm sending him back to you. So you'll be happy to see him. He'll be happy. And I'll be less worried because the dude almost died. But what's interesting is Paul says he was ill and he almost died. But Paul didn't say, and so I used my super healing powers and just healed him. Did Paul heal people? Yes. Did that mean Paul has the ability to heal indiscriminately? No. God heals. God used Paul in a lot of powerful ways to do powerful miracles. And I just think it's worth emphasizing that. Can God use you to lay hands on someone and heal them? Yes. Can God use a particular person to do that maybe more than other people? Yes. But does that mean any person has a complete power within themselves to heal or not heal based on their discretion? Paul didn't have that. Did Paul heal? Yes. Could he always in every situation? No.
Yeah.
But, and you see that where he had to leave Trophimus sick at Miletus in 2 Timothy. He's like, just sometimes it rolls that way. And that doesn't negate the way God gifts people. It just means the gifts are God's to give. So
Yeah.
totally unrelated to the topic, but it's right there in the text.
Yeah.
And as someone who loves the Bible, I've just got to talk about it. Okay, how many was that? Was that 3 or 4?
Those 3.
Well, then we'll just do one more. The last thing I was going to talk about was, at the end, I threw in that story about the sweet girl, and I know I've told it before. I don't remember when. I actually had different stories lined up of missionaries. Some I'll save for later, but one was John Wesley. When he was coming to America for the first time, was coming as a chaplain, but he wasn't a Christian. And he wrote it in his journal, I'm coming to convert the heathen, but who will convert me? It's a little dramatic, but he knew I'm not a Christian. But it was on the boat to America that he was leading a service on the boat, and the waves began to crash over it, broke the mainsail. He thought it was going to kill everybody. He said the English began to full-on panic. But there were a group of people from Germany, the Moravians, who, he said, all boat ride long, they would do the kind of serving that nobody wanted to do. They would, when people would shove them or were rude to them, they weren't rude back. He said, and then when the waves came in, we were in the middle of the service. He said, all the English started shrieking. He said, but the Germans kept singing. And he said, so I asked them later, how did you do that? And they said, because we're not afraid to die. And he said, well, how did you keep your women and children under control? And they said, because our women and children aren't afraid to die. And Wesley went back to the English and said, that's what it is to fear God alone, to be someone who really knows God. He said, look at their lives. It's unbelievable. And he had a terrible ministry in America because it's hard to minister when you're not a Christian. So he left and went back to Europe, and the first thing he did was found the Moravians. And they read him the book of Romans, and he became a Christian and became a powerful force for good in America, one of the most prolific evangelists on the face of the planet. And how did it happen? Because the Moravians were positive, worshipful, loving, serving people. And he examined their life, saw it, and said, my goodness, they have something I don't. And they shone.
Yeah.
They shined, however you say it. I don't know. They were luminaries. And it changed John Wesley and arguably America, quite honestly.
Wow.
So I hope that encourages and challenges us, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I think that's such a cool illustration that when you look at this text, in so many words, Paul makes it clear it's not that you don't grumble because God said so and you do it. It's because you can trust that he's good, and you can trust him, and that confidence fills you up with his light, and it shines. So yeah, convicting message, but encouraging as well. And just a great reminder that through Christ and through his Spirit in us, we do have light. And why would you cover that? So yeah, thankful for another great night in Reed. Thankful for really just a great semester. And you mentioned tonight that we're just over the midway point, which is crazy to think about. But we still got a lot of great breakaways to come. So keep tuning in. Next week, we will be at Olson Field. Excited about that for some good Texas fall weather. I don't think you can really call it fall weather, but the Texas version. So it'll be a great night. So come join us.
It'll be fun. Well, pray for us that there's no trains that go by while I'm preaching. And number two, it's a message that really is going to aim at explaining Christianity. And so it really aims at the non-believer in a lot of ways. So be praying for us. We challenge students to bring their friends. Not so we could break attendance records or something, but so that their friends could hear the gospel. And so pray for us that that'll happen. That's our hope, that ball field will be a pretty special place for people to meet God for the first time. So be praying with us and keep listening in, and thanks.